strong supporter of Black Lives Matters. The Uyghur issues in China is similar to the African American issues in America. Since the terrorist attacks, March 1st, 2014, Kunming train station massacre, that the Uyghurs carry long knife and just butchered 29 just passengers at the train station. Just like how American government put African American in jail, Chinese government put a lot of Uyghurs in detention camps. The African Americans, no matter how they've been mistreated by the system, African Americans never resort to terrorist attacks.
How Kunming of South China and Bangkok of Thailand are linked with Uyghurs from Xinjiang. Between 2013 and 2015, a number of terrorist attacks were committed by Uyghurs from Xinjiang, inside of China and in Bangkok, Thailand, against civilians. In particular, the Kunming massacre at the Kunming train station on March 1st, 2014, killed 29 civilians and injured over 80 people.
After the bombing of Bangkok's Erawan shrine, the attack is still shrouded in mystery. In the days that followed the blast, which killed 20, some analysts pointed to a possible link with Western China's Uyghur community. That theory is now gaining ground. The Muslim minority has long accused Beijing of repression, and many have fled the restive Xinjiang region. In July, Thailand controversially deported more than 100 Uyghurs back to China.
It's very possible that the explosions were timed not too long after this major repatriation effort. The Thai authorities sending back several dozen Uyghurs back to China.
2 men are in police custody. One was arrested on the Cambodian border with a Chinese passport that identified him as being from Xinjiang. The other was caught in a Bangkok apartment containing bomb-making materials and fake passports from Turkey, a popular destination for Uyghurs fleeing China. Police on Saturday released a photo of another suspect, initially describing him as Uyghur, before backtracking and saying he was merely Chinese. China itself has so far had little to say, and the investigation looks set to be a long one.
I think the Chinese are waiting for the Thai authorities to give them a full report before pointing the accusing finger at either Uyghur, so-called Uyghur terrorists in Xinjiang, or radicalized Uyghurs in the Middle East and other parts.
The third reason we're there is because there are 20 million Uyghurs, and they don't like Han Chinese in Xinjiang province in Western China. And if the CIA has to mount an operation using those Uyghurs, as Erdogan has done in Turkey against Assad, there are 20,000 of them in Idlib in Syria right now, for example. That's why the Chinese might be deploying military forces to Syria in the very near future to take care of those Uyghurs that Erdogan invited in. Well, the CIA would want to destabilize China, and that would be the best way to do it, to foment unrest and to join with those Uyghurs in pushing the Han Chinese and Beijing from internal places rather than external. Not saying it's going on right now, you didn't hear that, but it is a possibility. So that's why we're there, and I'll wager there are not a handful of Americans who realize that we, our military, has decided that for these strategic reasons, which are well thought out, we're going to be in Afghanistan for the next half century.
Kunming massacre on March 1st, 2014 by Uyghurs from Xinjiang, also dubbed 9/11 of China, killed 29 civilians and injured over 80 people.
Escalation of the tensions between certain Uyghurs and the Chinese state. In the past, we haven't really seen much activity outside of Xinjiang itself. We did see this alleged attack on Tiananmen Square late last year, but even that was much smaller scale. This particular attack looked very much to be organized, and looked much more, frankly, much more like a terrorist attack than anything I've seen yet done by Uyghurs in China. In fact, it's interesting because the Chinese government, in part, is working to develop Xinjiang with the hopes of alleviating ethnic tension. I think that's I do see this as potentially an escalation. We've seen this. We've seen basically since 2009, since the riots in Urumqi, a constant flow of violent acts. Some that look like they were localized expressions of frustration, perhaps retribution for things the police had done to members of people's family or so on. But in this particular case, first it being outside of Xinjiang, and secondly, very overtly targeting citizens, civilians, and being done by a group that seemed to be organized, definitely suggests that the tensions in Xinjiang are starting to boil over. Real worries is that that this results essentially in escalation on the part of the Chinese government and Chinese citizens in terms of increasing a lot of the activity that is creating the tension in Xinjiang to begin with. And in turn, I'm worried that we might see an increase of violence out of that, because already I've been reading a lot of expressions of anger among Chinese citizens, just in terms on the internet. Average citizens expressing that they're not going to speak with Uyghurs anymore. There's also some other voices saying, all Uyghurs are not the same. And we're also seeing that the Chinese government is immediately addressing this in the same way they've addressed other problems in Xinjiang, which is by intense increase in security.
I was born as a Chinese Muslim, which means my ancestors were from Central Asia, and then they moved to China and intermarried with local Mongolians or Chinese, Han Chinese, and so it came out as this called Hui Muslim group. We practice Islamic. My whole family are Hui Chinese Muslims. When I first came to United States, I thought America is a land of free and with equality. So I actually was surprised to see the life of African Americans. In China, we have affirmative action to basically protect minorities, kind of improve opportunity for minorities. For example, I went to college in a top tier university in China, and we have a special program for minorities from Xinjiang, including Uyghurs and Tajiks, many ethnic groups, mostly Muslims. We normally have a 4-year college program, but for these students from Xinjiang, they actually didn't pass the college entrance exam. So the Chinese government set up this special college program for them that they spend a year for a pre-college courses. So after they complete these pre-college courses, they will be enrolled in regular college programs, study to be engineers, of civil engineering, electric engineering, chemical engineering, so on. So in my school, we had about 500 of students from Xinjiang, and make friends with them, because as a Muslim, we we ate in the same cafeteria. In China, because Muslims have a dietary restriction, we do not want to mingle with other people who eat pork. So the Chinese government mandate all colleges and workplace to provide kosher, halal cafeterias for us. So then, we have much smaller cafeteria compared to the Han Chinese, which is normally serve thousands of meals at lunchtime or dinner time. But for us, it's just a few hundred. So our food is always better. My roommate is always jealous, was very jealous of me because she feel like my food is always tastes better than hers. And I share my food with my Han Chinese roommate as a treat. College, we have 8 girls in one room, share a dorm. The other 8 girls are all Han Chinese. One of my roommates said she never knew there's any minorities in China. I was the first minority she ever met in her life. So I thought when I came to the United States that America will have the same program for their minorities like African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans. I went to a graduate program. In that program for that year, there was 8 new admissions. 3 was given to white, and 5 were actually given to foreign students. This particular program really basically is a free graduate degree when you work for your professors in like teaching assignment or a research assignment. Honestly, I didn't feel I was qualified. My English was not as good as native speakers. Any African Americans probably speak better English than I do. And I wasn't very familiar with the subject I was supposed to teach the undergrad. My classmates from graduate school, we talk about it. We feel like we were really not prepared for it. But to my surprise, out of the 8 spots, not a single one was given to African Americans or other minorities. I feel, anybody with a college degree would be able to do my job, would be able to get this graduate degree, that upon graduation, all of us get into a decent job and enter middle-class life. Out of the 8 new admissions, actually only 5 of us graduate. One white student didn't graduate. I think maybe the 2 other graduate students, from one is from Israel, the other one from Poland, didn't graduate. The 3 Chinese students graduated from the master program. So I kind of surprised why American education system will prefer to give this free graduate degree scholarship to foreigners, and instead of giving to African Americans, especially 3 out of 8 didn't complete the degree, basically waste this opportunity. So sometimes I feel I want to thank African Americans. I feel sorry that I unexpectedly and took over your opportunity, and then without you actually know it. So I feel there is something more like the white educational system want to import foreign students to replace African Americans, that denied African Americans their opportunity to middle class life. And as I live in the United States longer, and I feel more and more there's such a system that systematically deny opportunities, upward mobility for African Americans. So for this, I'm a strong supporter of Black Lives Matters. Now we come back why I want to put Lives Matters in this particular segment. Because the Uyghur issues in China is similar to the African American issues in America. Yes, in China there's a racism. For certain things is reverse discrimination. For example, Uyghurs from Xinjiang were exempt from one-child policy in China. When Han Chinese only allowed to have one child per household, and Uyghurs could have 4 to 6 child in their household. And so this is like a reverse discrimination. I remember in the 80s, the Hui Muslims were the second largest ethnic group in China, the largest Muslim group in China. And the Uyghurs were distant down the road. But now, after 20 years, the Uyghurs actually have caught up with the population growth. Right now, we are 12 million Hui Chinese, and there are also 12 million Uyghurs in China. So in 20 years, almost they doubled their population. And this is actually the Chinese reverse discrimination policy that helped Uyghurs to grow their population. Another thing about Uyghurs, reverse discrimination to promote Uyghurs is normally to really calm the racial tensions, ethnic tensions between the Han Chinese and the Uyghur Chinese, is the zoning police normally do not enforce zoning laws with Uyghur street vendors, and to the anger of many Han Chinese. So that also include the Hui Muslims. You probably saw on some programs, there's a videos of the Hui, maybe restaurant owners or street vendors, the Uyghur street vendors, they actually beat up the zoning police. And that could never happen with Han street vendors, because the zoning police are pretty harsh with the Han street vendors, but they actually give a free pass to many Uyghur street vendors or Hui Muslim street vendors. But since the terrorist attacks in the late 1990s and early 2000, all the way to 2014, 15, the sentiment among Han Chinese and in response to such sentiment, the Chinese government start to put more surveillance on the Uyghurs to monitor their terrorist attacks activities, especially after the March 1st, 2014 Kunming train station massacre, that the Uyghurs carry long knife and just butchered 29 just passengers at the train station And that kind of, such activity escaped the Chinese surveillance because I think China was not prepared. Things can happen, such a terror attack by the Uyghurs could happen outside Xinjiang. So in response, just like how American government put a lot of African American in jail, Chinese government put a lot of Uyghurs in detention camps. So I think the African Americans, no matter how they've been mistreated by the system, African Americans never resort to terrorist attacks against civilians, against white people, Asians, or or other ethnic groups. But the Uyghur did. Not only they did it in China, at the Kunming train station, they also launched a bombing in Thailand in protest. The Thailand capture the elite human traffic of Uyghurs into Thailand and deport them back to China. Just for the law enforcement by the Thai government that the Uyghurs bombed a Thailand shrine in Bangkok and killed over 20 people. Some of them are Chinese tourists. So I know like different countries will deal with racial tension differently. The American system just find all the reasons to put so many African Americans in jail. In China, yeah, they put a lot of Uyghurs in the detention camps. The government deal with the social issues differently. But I know, so many young African Americans died before age of 75. I don't know if you will call that as genocide of African Americans, as you call China putting Uyghurs in detention camp, make them to learn Chinese along Uyghurs because they are Chinese citizens, and if they ever want to find a job, with the Chinese employers, they have to speak Chinese. There are just not a lot Uyghur business, just like there's not a lot of African American owned business. A lot of African American have to speak English, not their African native language. They have to speak English to their white employers. I don't see what's the big deal that Uyghurs become bilingual. I don't know. Well, and I think Native Americans probably have already lost their language after, I think, 95 million of Native Americans has been slaughtered in the past few hundred years in America. So, I really don't understand this genocide of Uyghurs when there's actually no statistic of how many or any Uyghurs actually died in the detention camps in China. Well, a lot of African Americans has been killed, like George Floyd.
Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups. The rate of incarceration now is about 5 times higher than it was historically. Historically it was 100 per 100,000, now it's about 500 per 100,000. If we look at prison, if we add jail to that, it's about 700 per 100,000. Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. And that's about 1 in 9. The research shows the kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out. And there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls. And there's a very real risk here that incarceration becomes an inherited trait. The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty. And we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.